Byron, the reason why, because I spent some time with Matt LaFleur in covering the Dolphins versus the Titans week number 1. Him and I spent some time together talking football, talking the X's and O's. And sometimes, if you're ever going for a job interview, sometimes your resume might not match up to the job that you are interviewing for, but people like your personality. And that's what I believe that the Green Bay Packers, what they saw. They like his personality. They like the way he talked about football and what they thought he could do with Aaron Rodgers, because I believe, yes, he is one of the bright young minds that we have. And just because his resume doesn't match up, because you're not going to be able to pull film from last year in Tennessee with the Titans and be able to transfer that to, oh, I wonder what they're going to do in Green Bay. So I believe he's a lot like Sean McVay. He was that way in Washington before the Rams took the chance in hiring him. I believe that Green Bay, they do have the right guy because he's dynamic in the interview. He really talks football well, and that becomes very, very important because in teaching football. So Aaron Rodgers, I believe, got lucky. He's got a guy that they can grow together with as a young coach. That's what Green Bay has gone for in their last number of hires on the offensive side in who their head coach is going to be.
Right, it follows the trend of Holmgren, McCarthy, as far as young guy who would kind of taking a chance, first head coaching gig for a guy.
Yes.
Young at the time, offensive mind for Holmgren and McCarthy. This is, and by the way, it should be noted, he was quarterback's coach the year Matt Ryan set all those records, and he learned under Kyle Shanahan. And then he was the offensive coordinator last year in Los Angeles, learned under Sean McVay. This year, the Titans offense was not impressive, and I understand Steve's point, which is there any coordinator that would have made that offense impressive? I will say this for the Packers. This is the move I cautioned against. The last time I cautioned a team go with the safe choice instead of the upside choice, it was the Browns in the draft. I said, take Darnold or Rosen instead of Baker because you need to take the safest choice, not the choice with the most upside. They took Baker. They're thrilled they did. With the Packers, I said, when you only have 4 or 5 years left of Aaron Rodgers, go with a coach like Jim Caldwell that you know is not going to flame out. They went with the upside choice. Hopefully for them, it works out the way it looks like the Browns draft.
One thing Jenna asked me, well, Chris, what did you see in Tennessee this year that makes you think that it's going to transfer to Green Bay? Well, what I saw was a guy who was not stuck in his concepts of a lot of motion, 3-4 receivers on the field. No, he adapted to his personnel. So a lot of times we see guys who are married to what their philosophy is and they can't adapt. He adapted to having Henry. He adapted to having a big, strong offensive line, a young dual-threat quarterback in Marcus there. So he will adapt to having the best thrower of the football that we have in the NFL. I'm excited to see what he's going to do with the Packers.
All right, let's get back to last night's surprising outcome in the national championship game. Clemson blowing out Alabama. 44-16 was your final. The Tigers winning their second national title in 3 years. And to break it all down, Fox lead college football analyst Joel Klatt joins us. Joel, thanks for being on this great college football ride all season long. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Good to be here, guys.
Well, let's start sort of overall. What stood out the most to you in Clemson's win over Alabama last night?
Well, first of all, it was just a beatdown, and we haven't seen Alabama play that poorly in a decade. And Clemson had a lot to do with that. Their game plan was tremendous, and that's where I'll start. My biggest takeaway was the fact that Saban and his coaching staff got outcoached badly in that football game. And I think you have to start taking a look at how many times Saban has had to replace assistant coaches versus Dabo Swinney. Just to give you a sense, in this 4 games that they've played over the last 4 years, the Clemson side has had the same coordinators the entire time, offensively and defensively. Meanwhile, every single time that Alabama is trotting out there to play Clemson, they've got a new combination of coordinators. It started with Lane Kiffin and Kirby Smart, and then it went on, and they had all sorts of different combinations. You had Jeremy Pruitt in there. You've got Tosh Lapoy now. You've got Brian Daboll had a stint as the offensive coordinator. Now it's Mike Locksley. Steve Sarkisian was in there one time calling plays. I think the lack of continuity for coaching staff is one of the reasons why Alabama got outcoached so badly last night against a team that has had a lot of continuity as far as the coaching staff goes.
Joe, but you still have to be surprised that this Alabama staff, Nick Saban, Mike Locksley going on to be the Maryland, calling the plays there at Alabama, they laid a goose egg in the second half. You still have to be shocked by Alabama's lack of productivity in the second half of that game.
No doubt about it. And CC, you hit the nail on the head there. The lack of productivity was alarming. The fact that Tua Tagovailoa was not seeing things was alarming. They were not prepared. And it got me thinking about the semifinal game. Because here's what it looked like to me. Chris, it looked like to me that Clemson prepared for Alabama for a month and Alabama prepared for Clemson for 1 week. So I started to think to myself, maybe Clemson knew that they were just better than Notre Dame and they could beat them with somewhat of a vanilla game plan, and they were game planning for Alabama this whole time. Meanwhile, Alabama had to give their full attention to Kyler Murray and that Oklahoma offense. Maybe that was a factor, because it certainly looked like Alabama was not prepared for some of the nuance that Clemson brought to them in the game plan.
What impressed you more last night? The guy throwing passes for Clemson, Trevor Lawrence, or the 5 guys protecting Trevor Lawrence and that offensive line and keeping him upright against what is historically always a great Alabama front?
Well, they were able to run the football a little bit. Etienne did have a decent night. It wasn't a great night, but that, I thought, neutralized the rush just a little bit. And then, Nick, for the money, give me Justin Ross, the wide receiver. If you're asking me who was the most impressive player of the entire night, it was Ross. I know Lawrence is going to get all the accolades, but Lawrence threw a couple of those passes that, candidly, were very average passes, and Ross bailed him out. He hit a couple of very open receivers down the field. I don't want to take away from what he did as a freshman, but Justin Ross is also a true freshman, and he made some of the more spectacular catches that I've seen in a long time. 2 one-handed catches, one reaching back all the way back behind a defensive back on a 3rd down. Justin Ross, for me, was the most impressive, I should say, Clemson Tiger.
Joel, we've had you on the show just about every week of this college football season, and every week I asked you about Tua Tagovailoa and just how dominant he's been, how good he is, how he doesn't get rattled ever in big games, and then he had the ankle sprain, still came out and played. What did you make of the way he struggled last night?
Yeah, something was going on from the get-go. In that first series, he doesn't see the corner fall off of that little outside route, and the corner goes and takes it for a pick 6. He doesn't see the corner fall off a different route. He's got a wide-open guy in the flat. He throws it down the field, forces it to Jerry Jeudy. I thought that he was playing outside of himself for the first time all season long. Quarterbacks can sometimes do this. They start to press. They want to create offense rather than letting the offense come to them, and that's when they get into trouble, and that's what happened to Tua. Again, he was not prepared with a lot of the looks. Give Brent Venables a lot of credit, the defensive coordinator for Clemson. They had a lot of what I would call automatic dog blitzes, which means that on a short motion from the outside, let's say, or some other type of formational look that they had some tendency against Alabama, they would just automatically blitz. And so all of a sudden, the corner was in there. They weren't protecting. They weren't side adjusting. They didn't have any hots on that side. And that game plan rattled Tua from the get-go, and he was never himself.
What does winning 2 national championships for Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers, and what does it mean going forward for college football?
Well, we got 2 really good programs right now. We've got 2 elite programs and everyone else chasing. I think there's a handful of teams. I would say Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Georgia are your next tier. Maybe Texas rises into that with their win over Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. But those are the 4 teams that are now looking at these 2 teams. But the margin, CC, is really, really stark right now. Clemson has put themselves on the mountaintop, and now Alabama's going to have to go after them. I think Alabama is the best team in the country, at least when you're talking about the team that could potentially beat Clemson next year. But these are far and away the 2 best programs in the country. But Dabo Swinney has put himself on what I would consider right now an unequaled pedestal over the last 3 years. The last 3 years, you've seen 2 national championship games with these 2 teams, and Clemson has won both of them. In fact, the last time that we saw Alabama beat Clemson for a national championship, remember, it took a kick return, also a fake kick that they had to execute in order to get that done. Saban threw the gauntlet at them last night, and Clemson was prepared.
Let's stay there for a second, Joel. When Saban won his first title at Bama nearly a decade ago, we had told you they were about to go on a dominant run. That wouldn't have surprised anyone. And if I'd have told you there's going to be one team by the end of the next decade in all of college football that is neck and neck with them, I don't know, Clemson would have been the 25th school you name?
Right. Well, you would have said Texas, because that was the first time Alabama won the national championship. Texas was right there.
Or Texas, or maybe USC comes back, or one of the Florida schools, or Ohio. Clemson, I think people, because of recency bias, don't realize how unexpected this is. Can you put in the context for college football what Dabo Swinney has done in building a new blue blood amongst blue bloods?
That's a great question. Here's where I would first start. I believe that there were 2 turnarounds, right? Taking a program from one point to another that had like the most distance to gain. Gary Barnett at Northwestern in the mid-90s when he took Northwestern to a Rose Bowl and won the Big Ten. That was an incredible coaching job, what he did in the 90s. And then what Bill Snyder did at Kansas State, taking historically the worst program in the history of college football into a perennial contender, even into a year, I believe, in 98, in which they were ranked #1 in the country. Those are the two I would say. But now, taking Clemson from a team that was just an average ACC football team forever, ever since their early 80s national championship, and then they were just a very average football team. Maybe they would win 10 games, and now to put them on the dominant path that they've been on, I think Dabo Swinney has done as good or better a job than even Gary Barnett with Northwestern or Bill Snyder with Kansas State. And those are two of what I would consider the greatest coaching jobs in the history of the sport when you're taking a program from one point to another with the most space to gain.
Joel, before we let you go, I got to ask you about Dwayne Haskins, declared for the NFL draft yesterday. Do you think he is the best college quarterback on the board?
This year, yes, I do. I think he's going to be the #1 quarterback taken. I think that there's a lot of room for growth for Dwayne. He's got experience to gain, certainly. I think he would probably benefit from sitting behind a veteran. I heard you guys talking about the New York Giants. I think that would be a pretty good fit for him. I don't know if Jacksonville would be a great fit for him, just because I think he would have to play right away. And I don't know if he's gotten the reps requisite to do that. But having said that, there's a couple of quarterbacks that are in next year's draft and then 1 and 2 drafts that NFL evaluators are already salivating over, and that's Tua Tagovailoa, Jake Fromm next year, and then Trevor Lawrence in 2 years. And I think you're going to start to hear a lot about Trevor and his potential NFL prospects in 2 years. But this year, it's going to be Dwayne Haskins that likely will be the #1 quarterback taken in the NFL draft.
Joel, it's been a great season. Thank you so much for being with us, sharing your insight.
You
Much
bet.
appreciated.
Absolutely. It's always great coming on with you guys.
We'll be in touch. Joel, thanks for everything. Much more First Things First right after.